Welcome back to Killer Stories. I'm your host, Bobby Holmes. Thanks to all that turned in to hear my 6-year-old son, Penn, talk about monsters from the Godzilla franchise. He's always asking to help with my podcast, and that's obviously not a good idea. It's not PG material. So when my brain needs a break, I allow him to do his thing. And he loves when I read him the messages I get from my listeners praising his performance. Here's an Apple Podcast review from Ardent Armadilla. I am really enjoying this amazing podcast, and I absolutely adore killer creatures. I also wanted to give a shout out to Frankie Barnhart. She loves Penn's episodes so much that she sent him a book about monsters in the mail. Not only that, but she took the time to hand knit a tiny little gnome that he named Gerald. Frankie, you are very thoughtful and generous. Okay, on to this week's story. This case was suggested by listener Christopher Martin. I'm covering the Bever family murders, which is also known as the Broken Arrow killings. A horrific mass murder where 5 members of the Bever family were stabbed to death. It took place in 2015 in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. David and April Bever had a large family, 7 children spanning 16 years apart. Robert, Michael, Crystal, Daniel, Christopher, Victoria, and Autumn. Let's do some math. 7 children plus 2 parents makes 9 family members, 5 of which are murdered, leaving 4 survivors. You've heard of family annihilators. Statistically, they tend to be the father murdering the wife and children. But that is not the case for the Bevers. This is a case of child family annihilators. Broken Arrow is a very quiet town. It has one of the best school districts in Oklahoma. Because of this, the area is very family friendly. There are tons of parks and recreational spots for children to play. It has a very low crime rate, basically non-existent. This is why police were in complete shock when they received the 911 call on July 22, 2015. Before we jump into it, let's get a little background on the Bever family. David, the father, worked as a computer programmer and data analyst. April, the mother, stayed at home. As you can imagine, her plate was full with 7 kids, but she still managed to do some remote work from her computer. The Bever family didn't take advantage of the highly rated public school system. The kids were homeschooled by April. And before anyone jumps on the comments to bash me, to each their own. When it comes to public school versus homeschooling, you do what's best for your family. But in the case of the Bevers, they ended up living very sheltered lives. This case was featured in the Oxygen series Killer Siblings, Season 1, Episode 4. They stated that the Bever family tended to keep to themselves. They were rarely seen out and about, the exception being attending church together every Sunday morning. Otherwise, they were basically homebodies. The 2 eldest brothers, Robert and Michael, were very close. They spent a lot of their time playing video games and watching YouTube. Robert started his own YouTube channel. There were only 2 videos uploaded, and they were mainly him talking about harmless things like his new hairdo and video games. Primarily the game Minecraft, which has mild violence, if you can even call it violence. It's more like using an axe to whack a pixelated zombie until it blinks red and disappears. My 6-year-old's current obsession. In other words, his channel did not show any signs of violent behavior from Robert. And watching YouTube and playing video games seems pretty typical for a teenager, right? But when the content of your YouTube and Google searches are about school shootings, mass murders, and groups who worship serial killers, I would say that's reason for concern. Having said that, I hope no one ever sees my Google searches, but I promise they are for Killer Stories research only. Robert and Michael were so isolated from the outside world that they obsessed over the notoriety these killers had. They wanted that, to be famous, or infamous is more like it. Robert watched a video called Rampage over and over. In this video, people stabbed others who were, quote, not contributing to society. The idea was planted into Robert's head that he could help clean the world, get rid of those not worthy of life, as if that is for him to decide. He wanted to be a household name across America. His goal was to kill 500 people. He eventually let his younger brother Michael in on the plan. Michael was excited about the idea and wanted to join Robert. I think he looked up to his older brother and honestly would go along with whatever he said. The two purchased body armor online and began collecting knives. Their sister, 13-year-old Crystal, went to her parents with concerns about Robert and Michael's knife collection. She said it made her feel uneasy. But April and David didn't see it as an issue. They said boys will be boys. Robert and Michael's plan to become the most prolific serial killers in history started with their family. They were going to kill all of them. Now, I will admit I don't know a ton about their upbringing, but most of the cases I've covered where kids killed their parents, there was some sort of reasoning behind it. Jasmine Richardson because her parents didn't approve of her older boyfriend. Tyler Hadley because he had never experienced discipline his entire life, and as a teenager, his parents decided to start parenting. His case had some underlying mental issues due to a thyroid problem and mismanaged medications. But you get my point. There is usually a reason that causes the teen to snap. But here, these boys are like, we want to kill people. Where can we find people? Hey, I know, right here in the house, there's 7 people. A psychopath is characterized by persistent antisocial behavior. Check. Impaired empathy and remorse. Check. And egotistical traits. Wanting to be the biggest, baddest serial killer ever takes a big ego. Check. Deciding to kill your family for no apparent reason most definitely falls into the psychopath category. Robert later stated that he did it because their family stood in the way of their killing rampage. Were both Robert and Michael psychopaths, or did Michael just idolize his big bro and follow along? July 22nd, 2015, a 911 call came in at 11:30 p.m. He quietly muttered the word help before telling the dispatcher that his brother was attacking his family. Another male voice could be heard in the background before the connection was lost. Every police officer and detective on duty in Broken Arrow rushed to 709 Magnolia Court. When they arrived, they could hear a faint voice behind the door pleading for help. When they opened the door, they saw 13-year-old Crystal lying there in a pool of blood. She was alive, but badly injured. Her throat was slashed, and she had been stabbed in the arms and stomach. She was immediately rushed to the hospital for emergency surgery. Not knowing if the assailants were still there, police cautiously searched the home. They went from room to room until they discovered April and 12-year-old Daniel. They were covered in stab wounds and were pronounced dead at the scene. David was the next body found. He was slumped over and covered in blood. While clearing the rest of the home, they find that the bathroom door in the hallway was locked. Typically, when you come across a locked door, that is where the suspect is hiding. They raised their weapons and kicked the door open. What they found inside was not at all what they were expecting. They were in complete shock to see 7-year-old Christopher and 5-year-old Victoria. They had been stabbed to death and locked inside the bathroom. In the episode of Killer Siblings, officers held back tears as they spoke about this discovery. They said it was the worst thing they had ever seen. At this point, they had searched the entire first floor of the home. They carefully went up the stairs and cleared room by room. They held their breath as they opened the door to a nursery. It was a miracle to find 2-year-old Autumn untouched, alive, and well in her bed. Relief sets in to know that there was a survivor, but their search wasn't over. They continued to look for the perpetrator responsible for this massacre. One of the officers noticed that the back door was ajar. A canine unit was called to the scene and tracked the scent leaving the home. As they followed the trail, they found a set of body armor that was discarded. It didn't take long, maybe 10 minutes, for the canine to track down Robert and Michael in the woods. An officer yelled for them to drop any weapons and put their hands in the air. Robert followed orders, but Michael remained hunched down in the bushes. Officers released the canine who attacked Michael, biting him on the shoulder. Both boys were handcuffed and walked back through the field to the police car. Their clothes were blood-stained, torn, and covered in dirt from their attempted escape. They were photographed for evidence. Robert was still wearing his body armor underneath a black t-shirt. The shitty grin on his face in these photos makes me want to scream. The boys were separated and taken to separate patrol cars. Robert yells over to Michael and says, "It's been a pleasure, and I'm proud of what I've done." Once taken to the station, they were separated to conduct interviews. Michael was up first. He calmly explained that 2 months prior, Robert discovered that he could legally purchase a gun without a permit in the state of Oklahoma. This is what triggered the idea of killing people. Honestly, the calmness of Michael in this interview is so eerie. He told the detective that the guns could be purchased at a gun store, but Robert ordered a large amount of ammunition online and it was going to be shipped to the house. Once the ammo was delivered that weekend, they would use it to start a rampage, hitting places like gas stations and restaurants. Knowing their dad wouldn't be happy when boxes full of ammunition arrived the following day, they decided to kill them that night. Their plan was to quietly enter each room, sneak up on their victim, and kill them with the slash of a knife. Michael said, "It's not like on TV where you cut them once and they die." The boys were surprised by the amount of effort it took to kill them. Things did not go as planned. The attack caused commotion, screaming, and a 911 call placed by their younger brother, Daniel. The plan was to continue living at the house like nothing happened until the ammo was delivered. Then they would swing by the gun shop and head out of town. In Michael's interview, he denied stabbing anyone. Robert did everything and he was just along for the ride. But Robert was excited to talk. His interview is under lock and key and not available for public viewing, but I know that he went into detail bragging about what they did. Yes, they, as in Robert and Michael. When the detective went back to confront Michael, he admitted everything. Michael said he only did it because Robert told him if he didn't, he would kill him too. This is how it all went down. Around 11:30 p.m., April and 13-year-old Crystal were on the couch watching TV. Michael told Crystal to come upstairs. He needed to show her something on the computer. She walked up to his bedroom and leaned in to take a look. Robert came up behind her and attempted to slit her throat. But they did not anticipate that Crystal would fight back. She began kicking and screaming, causing April to come running up the stairs. The boys turned their attention from Crystal to their mother. They stabbed her over and over. Michael was the one to reach around from behind and, quote, cut her windpipe. Crystal was able to get herself out the front door where she collapsed in the front yard. Daniel heard the commotion and came out of his bedroom to see Robert standing there with a knife. He swiped and made contact with Daniel's arm. Daniel ran back into his room, locked the door, and dialed 911. Michael begged Daniel through the door to let him in. He said that Robert was trying to kill him. Concerned for his brother's safety, Daniel opened the door. Michael grabbed the phone and ended the phone call. Then Daniel was attacked by his brothers. The younger siblings, Christopher and Victoria, knew something was horribly wrong and locked themselves in the bathroom. Michael deceived them in the same way. He said that Robert was trying to kill him and begged them to open the door. The house was large and David was asleep in the master bedroom. He was awakened by the screams of Christopher and Victoria. He came running out of the bedroom. Robert was waiting with a large knife. He must have hit a major artery because David went down after one blow. The boys realized that Crystal had escaped, but looking out the window, they see that she didn't make it very far. Robert grabbed Crystal and dragged her back inside. He covered her mouth and nose with his hands in an attempt to suffocate her. She either passed out or played dead. Robert and Michael had planned to kill their 2-year-old baby sister, Autumn, as well. But as they started to walk up the stairs, they heard pounding on the front door. It was the police. They bolted out the back door. And side note, shouldn't there be an officer at the back door? I guess they didn't know the severity of the situation until they arrived, but all they knew was Daniel's statement, "My brother is attacking my family." The preliminary hearing to determine the charges for Robert and Michael Bever started February 23, 2016. They are each charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault and battery with intent to kill. Michael, at age 16, was tried as an adult, but Robert, being 18, was actually eligible for the death penalty. Crystal was a key witness at trial and requested not to pursue the death penalty for Robert. Trial would go much faster, seeking a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her hopes are that both brothers would plead guilty so she didn't have to testify at all. But if it did go to trial, she wanted it to be as quick as possible so she could move on with her life. Robert pleaded guilty to his charges, so they were able to skip his trial. Michael, on the other hand, pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. His attorneys were trying to have his confession thrown out and changed to juvenile charges. On what basis his confession could be thrown out is beyond me. A psychiatrist interviewed him and said he was legally sane. He said, "Most people believe that you have to be insane to do this type of thing, but some people are just bad people who do bad things." The murder trial for Michael lasted 6 weeks. Robert Bever was brought in to testify. He smiled and giggled while on the stand. His testimony was different from his confession. He originally stated that he and Michael both participated in the stabbing. Michael later corroborated that. Now, Robert is saying that he acted alone in the stabbing, trying to protect Michael. Then, their younger sister, Crystal, took the stand. She had to tell her story while Robert and Michael were in the room staring back at her. Luckily, on August 9th, 2018, the jury came back from deliberation with a guilty verdict. Michael was to serve 5 consecutive life sentences for 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault and battery with intent to kill. Neither of them will ever be released from prison. They were sent to different prisons because co-conspirators in a crime are not permitted to be together. Robert is serving at the Joseph Harp Correctional Center in Lexington, Oklahoma. He has had many looks while in prison: skinny, chubby, bald, and I'm not going to lie, when I first saw this picture, I thought it was a photoshopped wig put on his face, but apparently he grew his hair long and gave himself bangs. And he's got that shitty grin on his face in every single picture. I will share the photos on my social media. Robert has tacked on 3 more life sentences to his already 5 because he attacked prison staff with an 8-inch long sharpened instrument. Michael started his sentence at the Oklahoma Department of Corrections, but has since been moved to Lexington Assessment and Reception Center. Michael tried to appeal his conviction, stating that the consecutive 5 life sentences is unfair. He believes he should be able to serve them all at once, which makes no sense to me at all. Justice Gary Lumpkin said, "A defendant, even a juvenile, who murders 5 people and who plans to murder many more, is simply and fundamentally different than a defendant who murders 1 person. Therefore, his appeal was denied and he will likely die in prison." Crystal and baby Autumn were able to stay together. They were both adopted by a loving family in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The Bever home was abandoned. It became a spot that people flocked to just to say they had been in the house where 5 people were murdered. In March of 2017, the house burned down at the hands of an arsonist. It was demolished and replaced with a memorial. $50,000 was raised to create Reflection Park. There is now a large gazebo surrounded by a beautiful garden where the home once stood. Big thanks to Christopher Martin for suggesting this case. If you have a case you would like me to cover, send an email to killerstoriespodcast@gmail.com. Follow me on social media to see photos from today's episode. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Killer Stories Podcast, and I'm on Twitter at Killer Stories PC. If you would like to support the show, you can give a one-time donation at buymeacoffee.com/killerstories, or visit my Linktree where you can find Killer Stories merch. I split the profit with Missy from Freedom Street Boutique. The absolute best way to help is free. Tell your true crime loving friends about Killer Stories. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify. I appreciate you all more than you know. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, this has been a killer story.